There are so many court cases that are pending because of not having a succession plan in place. This is a general misconception that succession planning, estate planning, people think that this is for HNIs, ultra HNIs, but it's also common man. Succession planning is mostly for who I would want beyond me to have control over the asset.
What's the worst case scenario when you don't have your will in place, when you don't have your documents and your succession planning in advance?
The worst that can happen.
Shraddha Nileshwar is the Senior Manager, Will and Estate at One Finance. With over 9 years of experience, today she joins us to discuss why will and estate planning is a crucial aspect of financial planning and how one can approach it effectively.
Interesting report that's come out which talks about there's assets as much as 2 lakh crore rupees that have ended up unclaimed in India. What are the primary reasons for this and why are people actually losing track of wealth?
I think the younger the better, because you can then keep modifying your will.
Now say I want to go about succession planning. I want to start by drafting a will. What are the key steps that I need to ensure to get started?
So
I want to first put the spotlight on a lot of cases when it comes to inheritance and succession planning that have been in the media glare. For example, the KK Modi family, 5,500 crore rupees and major internal disputes with the sons accusing the mother of mishandling the family trust. You've also got cases like the Gautam Singhania family with his father. There's been a lot of internal disputes there. For example, wealthy families like the Kalyani family. Shraddha, start off by highlighting for us what is succession planning and why is it so relevant today?
Sure. Thank you so much for highlighting it. So, Avan, succession planning is all about, it's a very nuanced topic. So, you can divide it in 3 stages where a person should have a succession planning for an eventuality when he is not around. Secondly, when in cases where he is disabled, which not a lot of people take into account. And third, if he wants to retire from a family business or something of that sort. So there are a lot of these leakages in these structures that are already in place, which is why we see these and we take these as examples or precedents to of course build more watertight structures. But I think these are areas where this is where estate planners come into picture to envisage situations which the family wouldn't have. And not just structure it on the basis of the current family dynamics, but also, taking future eventualities or future circumstances in mind. So I think having a watertight structure is the key to lesser disputes.
Absolutely, a watertight structure, and we'll talk about what is needed to get there. But before that, given that we're talking about sums like 5,000 odd crore rupees, etc., some people may think, hey, this is only for, the ultra HNIs. Yeah. It's not pertinent to me. But even for people like you and me, having a will in place, having everything in place is very critical, right?
Yes, it is. So this is a general misconception that people have that, succession planning, estate planning, it's a very fancy word, so people think that this is for HNIs and ultra HNIs. But I think like everybody requires to go to a doctor when they have a medical condition. When you have a legal condition is where you go to an estate planner, right? So think of it from, from a point of view that you are not just putting structures in place during your lifetime. So you get to tweak those structures. Right? I mean, you get to see those structures evolve along with your family. So if you have something in place, it always gives you an area of opportunity to build on the same structure and then have a more advanced structure with the changing family dynamics. But agar shuruaat hi nahi hogi, so how will you then build on it? So I think it is very important that at least these conversations should start with, Indian families. We are not that receptive to succession planning. I think that is one of the key, issues that we estate planners go through, that it's very morbid. So we have to kind of, be very, of course, it's a very sensitive topic.
Of course.
Nobody likes to think about death, but I feel that death is the only constant that each of one has. Yeah. So planning in advance definitely gives you that sort of peace in mind. So you can definitely, literally rest in peace when you're no longer around, is what my take
Yeah.
would be.
And that is so important, right? You
Yeah.
want your loved ones at the end of the day, even when you're not there, to have that peace of mind and not have these conflicts and not have cases on each other.
Yeah.
But why then do you think that this is such a taboo? I know it is a morbid topic and people don't want to discuss it, but is there something deeper psychologically? Is there something, a particular reason that people just don't want to bring this up when it's such an important topic?
I think this is ingrained in us Indians, that the man or the patriarch of the family just, has these kind of plans, does investments, gets the money home, and just does all of this in silence. So these are not general dinner table conversations for people. So it is very difficult. Like it's not very common that you see a family having a dinner table conversation.
Yeah.
If I was not around, what happens then?
Yeah.
Imagine a situation where the patriarch passes away very suddenly.
Yeah.
With nuclear families coming into picture more, I think the issue is even larger. So the matriarch then has to step up, and imagine if the patriarch has assets, to theek hai. Of course, it comes later on. But if that patriarch had certain liabilities which the family is not aware of, I think that is where the issue begins. What does the matriarch do? We've seen, of course, with working women, it becomes a little easier to have that sort of financial independence. But imagine a situation where the matriarch was so dependent on the patriarch. She has no idea about the finances, children being minor, or children just started working. So there is a concept of legal maturity and financial maturity, right? So people don't really get financial maturity at least till the age of 30. So how do you expect those children to step up, or the matriarch to step up, if you don't discuss these things?
Yes.
So the least you can do is have an inventory of your assets and discuss it, or at least if you don't want to discuss it with your children, discuss it with your spouse. It's not just for the patriarch, it's also for the matriarch.
So it's so important to have a watertight plan in place. It's so important to make this a dinner table conversation. But like you said, so many people just stray away from it. So what's the worst case scenario when you're not planning in advance, when you don't have your will in place, when you don't have your documents and your succession planning in place in advance?
The worst that can happen to a family is the relations are so soured that the family just, they never talk to each other ever again. So when we talk about current family dynamics, when the patriarch or the person is around, everything is hunky-dory. But when the person passes away is when you actually see these, things coming into picture, especially where monies are involved. It's not just HNIs, ultra HNIs, but it's also common man.
Yeah.
He puts in hard-earned money. He ensures that, if his family is taken care of, but he doesn't have a succession plan in place. So what does he do? After he's not around, he cannot control anything, right? So if the family is not together, what happens? What good is his wealth that he's earned throughout his entire career? It doesn't make any sense. Also, additionally, there are so many court cases as on date that are pending because of not having a succession plan in place. So imagine if they had the conversation, it would relieve the courts from so many piled up cases, and it takes so many years, and then we blame the courts ki itna saal lagta hai. But imagine their dilemma as well, right? They cannot just disburse those amounts. There are so many cases, so many nuances to the cases. If we are talking about modern culture and etc., this should also be included in our conversations, healthy conversations, and not just from a point of view that I want to have a dispute of this sort, or I am going and claiming to my parents that I want my share in the property or something of that sort. But maybe the parents or Gen X and baby boomers, alphas, maybe they should also initiate this conversation with their children that, I am doing such and such things. So in case कोई लड़ाई होनी है तो उसी टाइम पे होके खत्म हो जाएगी,
Yes.
rather than it then going to court and then
Yeah.
you know it's spanning into 10-15 years, souring relationships, and then at the end of it when you even get those amounts, those inflation rates are so high
Yeah.
that it doesn't really make sense, you
Yeah.
know, to go
You've
and
wasted so many years.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
it is something that आज के आज कर लो, आज खत्म करो and live happily.
I like that aaj ke aaj kar lo. I think it is important that you need to have these conversations, and a lot of the time as well, especially when it's big families. For example, you have a good relationship with your sibling at the current juncture, but this is all for unforeseen circumstances, right?
Absolutely.
So even in the eventuality of that, it is important to have those conversations now. Can you emphasize on that?
Let me divide this, right? So in joint families, what happens is, even if the matriarch passes away, there are people who would support you,
Okay.
right? Not just emotionally, financially as well. So it doesn't get impacted so badly. But if you're a nuclear family, which is kind of the trend which is going on,
100%.
I think in the next 10-15 years, we're going to see only nuclear families. So when you have these situations, what do? You're just a family of 3 or 4. How are you going to overcome that situation? Not a lot of people also realize that once the dispute starts, all the bank accounts, all the assets are frozen. They don't really understand the importance of having this in place, just settling everything during their lifetime, and then just, you know,
Yeah.
rest in peace.
So let's understand it better. What is the difference between a will, estate planning, and even a private trust?
Sure. Let's delve into each of them differently. So a will is a document where today I, on a piece of paper, write my wishes. I appoint an executor. The executor of is a person who I appoint, who will give effect to whatever I write in the will, right? Second is the beneficiaries. So who are the beneficiaries? The ones that I would want to leave my estate to. In case of minor children, if I have minor children, I would need to appoint a guardian.
Okay.
Now, I would like to digress a little bit and just talk about, so parents are natural guardians.
Yes.
If the parents are not around, the person who's making a will would have to appoint a guardian in the will, right? Otherwise, the court appoints and it is not as per the comfort of your child. So then they will have to go ahead with whoever the court chooses. So which is a very risky scenario. The third is witnesses. So independent witnesses, so people who are not beneficiaries in the will are supposed to witness the will.
Okay.
What that does is that sort of authenticates that the person who's made the will has signed it before the witnesses. So these are the parties of the will. So the will takes effect after the lifetime of the testator. So the person making the will is called as a testator.
Okay.
Once that happens, if your will is prepared in Mumbai, Chennai or Kolkata, all these colonized states, you have to go through a process called as probate.
Okay.
Right? Probate is where the executor approaches the High Court, and the High Court, after it takes about 6 to 8 months for the probate to be granted by the High Court in a plain vanilla case also, without any disputes.
Okay.
What do you mean by probate? The High Court authenticates the will that this is the correct will of the person, and now his assets can be disbursed as per whatever is written. Now, when we come to succession planning, there is a huge difference between estate planning and succession planning. So, estate planning, like closing the loop. So, we do investments, we do insurances, we you know, we do all investments, different avenues.
Yeah.
Giving effect or planning how these would then take effect if I am not around is where estate planning comes into picture.
Okay.
Succession planning is mostly for where I would want to, who I would want beyond me to have control over the assets.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So there's a difference between the two. When we talk about private trusts now, so private trust is a vehicle which was known till now for HNIs and ultra HNIs, but this concept has now been a little more normalized for mid net worth or people like you and me. So where the person who's creating the trust will, the parties are similar. So there is the person who's creating the trust is called as a settlor. There would be trustees in the trust. So who are the trustees? The person who will be who will sort of administer the trust for the beneficiaries.
Okay.
Right? Then they have the beneficiaries. There are primary, secondary, all of these beneficiaries, and so this vehicle is more from a point of view that this doesn't have to go through a probate.
Okay.
So if you have a private trust, the major difference between a will and a private trust is wills are always susceptible to challenges, no matter even if it is registered or unregistered.
Okay.
So in the eyes of law, a registered and an unregistered will have similar treatment, right?
Okay.
And if you have a private trust in place, you do not have to go through the entire rigmarole of going for probate, getting it granted by the High Court. It just is a vehicle, pure succession planning purposes se banate hain.
So you think that it is preferable for even people like you and me to go ahead and use a private trust versus a plain vanilla will?
So I generally go for a combination of the two.
Okay.
Now, private trust, like we said, we are trying to make, normalize it, we are trying to make it cost efficient as well. So, yes, if you have any,
What's the differential cost-wise?
So differential is a will, you could have it made by a lawyer, and, it could cost you anywhere from maybe 5,000 to 10,000 for it to get completed. A private trust, for example, you will, the drafting and everything goes into the structuring and all of that. It's very complex. Ballpark would be anywhere between 3 to 5 lakhs.
Okay.
Right? But those are for HNIs and ultra HNIs.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about mid net worth clients, we will have like a more viable commercial option for them. So it could range anywhere between, so they will have to incur the cost of the registration, and then they will have to go through their routine tax filing. So the private trust has its own PAN card, its own TAN. So then the auditing comes into picture, and then the taxation part also comes into picture.
So the big advantage of this is that it then later on, at a later stage, cannot be challenged in a court of law.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
That's the main advantage.
Yes.
Okay.
So all of these are part of succession planning. So a will and a private trust is a part of succession planning. So when we say succession planning, these already automatically come.
These are the tools.
Yes, these are the tools.
Okay.
Aside from that, we also have power of attorneys. We also have living wills, which are also, coming into picture, all of those scenarios as well. So,
given that we spoke about the different types, I just want to zoom in on one of them, which is estate planning. You said that is when there are different asset classes, right? So can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
I think people at large know about two main asset classes, which is the real estate or the immovable properties and the movable properties. Immovable properties, your real estate gets covered. When you talk about movable assets, you have financial assets, and then you have gold, you have artifacts, you have paintings, which also form part of the estate. So financial assets may, of course, there's equity, there's mutual funds, there's insurances, all of those. But I think not a lot of people think about digital assets when it comes to assets. So if someone has royalties, if someone has patents, if someone has even your passwords that you have are also your estate. So how does your family know when you are not around? That is the crux of unclaimed assets, right? That they do not know where to start from. So a person's phone these days has everything. So it has every password, every at least for the younger generation, we have a lot of these passwords that are easily available in our phones. Royalties, all of these
Yeah.
consist of your digital assets. So these are intellectual properties. Not a lot of people take these into account when they're planning for it.
Okay, and since we're understanding all of these, concepts, what is the difference between a nominee and a legal heir?
This is the most common misconception
Yeah.
that people have, or rather they procrastinate big estate planning under this wing, that
Okay.
मेरे पास तो nominee है, so I don't really require a will in place. Under financial assets, I'll bifurcate. So under financial assets, which means except for insurances, if you have nominees in any of the other financial assets, they are mere custodians of those assets, which means that in case tomorrow it goes into dispute or something of that sort, once the dispute gets settled, the financial institutions will disburse these amounts. But the assets are owned, or their rightful owners are the legal heirs and not the nominee. So in case you have a nominee, but
Okay.
if you want to give that asset to somebody else, you won't be able to plan for that. So how do you do that? You name that asset in the will, jot it down in your will, and have a legatee in place or a beneficiary in place. So when you have a will in place, the will supersedes the nomination.
Okay.
So that is when the rightful owner can go and claim, that this is my asset, and this you can't really hold it.
Versus the legal heir.
Versus the nominee.
Okay.
So the legal heir supersedes the nominee,
Okay.
except for insurance,
Okay.
where the nominee himself or herself is regarded to be the legatee or the beneficiary. So the insurance company directly disburses it to the nominee.
I would imagine that if a will has not been created, and God forbid there is a situation where the person is no more, how does a person then go ahead and claim, the assets, etc., and what kind of a process is it? And then I assume that's when the jhagda begins. Yeah.
So it's actually a lengthier process than the probate that we discussed.
Yeah.
So even after having a will in place, if
Yeah,
in these cities, in these states, you still have 6 to 8 months before you get the assets for yourself.
Okay.
If you do not have a will in place, your legal heirs would then have to approach the court, and they will have to either get a succession certificate, or there's something called as letters of administration. So in absence of a will, or in absence of an executor being appointed, there are letters of administration. The application is almost exactly the same as probate, but this takes much, much longer, because then the court has to get into a lot of these nuances and, identify the beneficiaries, identify the intention of the person, and then the succession laws take their own course of time. So it's a rather lengthy process.
Yeah, and there is actually an interesting report that's come out by Money Life Foundation, Suchita Dalal, which talks about there's assets as much as 2 lakh crore rupees that have ended up unclaimed in India. What are the primary reasons for this, and why are people actually losing track of wealth?
I think the primary reason is, one, not having these dinner table conversations. Refraining from having healthy conversations, or even divulging details for any reason. While I empathize with a lot of people that they do not divulge their asset details, maybe even to their spouse or their children. But I would suggest, if you're not very comfortable sharing those details with your family members, at least jot them down. Keep it in your locker or in some place that is accessible to your family members if you're no longer around. But of course, having a will in place, of course, any day helps, because it details a consolidated list of all the assets that are held by you, and not just as on date, but it also has provisions for assets that are acquired even in future. So you don't even have to think about, you don't even have to worry about assets that you acquire in future. Those are already covered in the will. So one of the reasons is, of course, not having conversations. Second would be, a lot of times people forget. So I recently, one of my banks just contacted me that your KYC is not updated, right? So imagine if I pass away right now, going back home, if something happens to me. My family members don't even know about this bank account, right? So first they will have to get the KYC done. Now when the person is no longer around, how would you do the KYC? It is a longer process. Once that is done, the entire interstate succession comes into picture. So when you highlight these things to the bank or the financial institutions, they will ask you for legal documentation and not just KYC updation. So then the entire rigmarole of going for legal documentation, going around the courts, and then, whatever is granted in your favor, then takes effect. So it takes anywhere, and it's because it's such a tedious and a time-consuming process. Generally, people give up halfway. They're like, "Ki, nahi chahiye humko, whatever, it's okay, we'll manage, somehow we'll manage."
Because it's such a tedious magajmari type
Absolutely.
of process. But what if someone in this family suspects that there are unclaimed assets? How do they go about claiming it or reclaiming or even tracing them?
I think the first instance would be, let's talk about if that person was an elderly person. Now, the challenge with elderly people is that they like their assets or whatever proofs or evidences of the assets that they hold to be in physical forms. So if you have had a loss in the family and the person was an elderly person, maybe look around for physical passbooks or physical receipts or that sort of a thing.
Okay.
So that is how you will understand that that is the beginning process. If there is someone who has a lot of information on their phone, or the person belong to a younger generation, maybe go around their phones, access their phones, and you will get a lot of information about these things. One of the things is that because we have platforms like Udgam and all that is, which is very prevalent now. Of course, it's in its process, but it is taking its course.
What kind of an impact has it made, and how really does it help claimants actually locate these unclaimed bank deposits?
I think it's a great initiative to begin with, but it also comes with a lot of challenges. It's not that well known yet among the public. Maybe for the younger generations, yes, but the older generation still prefers going physically, giving paperwork. And even if today, someone approaches through Udgam, there is still human interference, which means that they would require paperwork. So I think the entire paperwork then takes a lot of time. So it is taking its course in, having that sort of impact on the public. But I think their interface needs to be more maybe senior citizen friendly, or a little more accessible and easy to use.
Are portals like this helping to navigate the bureaucratic and the legal hurdles that people have to go through to reclaim unclaimed assets, or what are the other things that can be done to help it smoothen out the process?
I think it would really help for these, for the government to actually launch something of a central repository where all the information is either linked to the PAN or Aadhaar, right? Modi ji has been screaming on the top of his lungs to get everything sorted. So link your PAN to your Aadhaar, link everything to your Aadhaar. So I think if they have a central repository, it would make a lot of people's lives easier, because then they only have to go to one portal and just get all the information. I think that is one of the things that maybe the government could look at.
Okay. And any steps that individuals can take well in advance to ensure that assets don't really get lost in the system and that heirs can actually claim it easily?
Yes, have a succession plan.
Okay. So now let's get to it step by step with respect to your estate planning and creating a will. Firstly, what is the appropriate age that you think people should actually be thinking of this?
So the age from which you start acquiring your first asset should be the first step. Even if you have a bank account and even if it has maybe 5,000 or 10,000 rupees, because your trajectory starts from your first asset. So even if you have an asset, you can obviously the younger the better, because you can then keep modifying your will as per your changing family
So it could be a very
dynamics.
young age.
Yes, it could be a very young
Yeah.
age. Vis-a-vis the first thought that comes to your mind for succession planning, I think that is when any person should have a will in place, because the legal age to make a will is 18.
Yes. Now, say I want to go about succession planning. I want to start by drafting a will. What are the key pointers and the key steps that I need to ensure to get started?
So suppose today I am invited to a game show, right? The game show asks me to get any two, three guests or any guests of my choice, and I have to nominate someone for for if I'm stuck in any kind of question or something of that sort. I will have to I can reach out to that
Yeah.
person, right? Now let's bring this in the context of succession planning. So the person that you would take with you would be the beneficiaries.
Okay.
You would want to enjoy, you would want them to enjoy whatever
the
success or
fruits
whatever
of
you're
your-
getting, right? The fruits. The person that you're relying on or you're nominating on the game show would be your executor,
Okay.
right? So you can, that is the person that you're relying on when you are the most stressed out, right? So you get just limited amount of time
Phone
to
a friend.
phone a friend. So you can actually think of that person as an executor who will carry on all your wishes, or someone who is very close to you and just give effect to whatever is written in your will. So that is the first, I think, step where you create your inventory. Then you think of structure, how you want to structure your will. See, one of the key stages in estate planning, or why people generally avoid estate planning, is because of the kind of strategies or the kind of structures or the kind of brainstorming that goes into it, which takes a lot of time. So deducing it to a document is mere a day's job, right? But coming to that conclusion is what people procrastinate. It's not generally the legal documentation that intimidates them, but it is this long process. But you would much rather give in maybe 20 hours of your life, plan, and then retire or be at peace.
So how does one get started? Can I make my will by myself, or how does one go about it?
You can make a will by yourself, but the problem is that if I try to cure my own disease, there is a possibility that it won't get cured. So you reach out to an expert or a qualified professional for this. What that would do is, there are generally pointers that you wouldn't think of while making a will, and you would just jot down things as per your current family dynamics. What the qualified person brings to the table is, he will pique your mind in a way that it will make you think, अच्छा ये situation आया तो ये भी कर सकते हैं. So we at One Finance do offer these services, and you can also go to any qualified lawyer or any estate planner for that matter, and get your will done. Whichever platform you go to, or however you make your will, except for by yourself, just ensure that it is legally valid. When I mean legally valid, it means that you should be of 18 years, you should be of sound mind, and the will should be witnessed.
Yes.
Right, by proper witnesses. If you're registering the will, or you should, even if you're not registering a will, you should have a medical certificate by a qualified doctor, attesting that you are of sound mind and you can make the will.
So now, assuming that someone has undertaken these steps and at some point is no more, and now you get access to the will, the successor, what are the steps that they need to go, what are the steps that they need to undertake in order to find out what assets they can claim, etc.?
It is generally, the will is either kept with the executor, or in certain cases, the testator or the testatrix informs the executor that मैंने will यहाँ रखा है.
Okay.
So upon the eventuality, it is the executor's job to go and procure that will,
Okay.
read out whatever is written in the will. If probate is required, make applications accordingly. If there is no probate required, then that person can actually read out that will to the family members, approach the financial institutions, your societies or municipal corporations to get the ownerships transferred.
What about inheritance tax? Because while countries like the US and the UK have inheritance tax of 30 to 40%, in India it's been abolished. So what are the implications here? Could it be reintroduced? And what happens then?
There have been talks since almost a decade now that it can be reintroduced in India. There are a lot of speculations that if it is reintroduced in India, it is going to be a very sudden introduction. The government will not give time to the public at large to first plan in advance. So it's kind of going to be like the monetization case where it will be announced overnight. So since almost since 2016, these have been in talks. There have been murmurs. But right now, I think because the government has also exhausted a lot of these income tax avenues and all of this. So there is a chance that it can be reintroduced. If it is reintroduced, I think the government will take cue from UK, US, which generally is in the economy. We take a lot of cues from the UK or the US. So in the US, there is state-wise inheritance tax, but the highest is 40%. So imagine if I inherit 100 rupees, I will have to give 40% to the government. So this is in addition to the income tax that I would be paying.
You know, there are so many myths and misconceptions when it just comes to succession planning, when it comes to writing of a will. What are maybe the top 3 myths that you want to bust?
First, मैं बहुत young हूँ. But I think after COVID-19 had hit us so hard that it did not really differentiate between an elderly person or a young person. So we saw so many sudden demises of younger people, healthy people, having like suddenly passing away. So I think no matter what your age, have a will in place. It will really sort out a lot of things for your family members. They will really remember you and be grateful to you कि आपने एक legacy छोड़ी है हमारे लिए, rather than just having disputes and just saying कि अरे यार हमारा काम बढ़ा दिया. Second is, this estate and succession planning is only for elderly people or for wealthy people. So even if I have an asset in place, I am going to acquire, अगर मेरा career start हुआ है, it is for sure that I am going to acquire more and more assets in future. So why not start it with succession planning? जैसे a lot of these generations now, younger generations are forthcoming about retirement planning. So they want to retire by 40, 45. So why not have this also in place? There's no harm in it. And the third is कि my family knows what I want. No, your family doesn't know what you want. Unless you specifically write down pointers, they are not in your brain. They cannot understand what you want. So they will have their own quarrels. So where there is a will, there is a dispute. That is for sure. So even if there is a will in place, there is a dispute. So imagine not having a will and still having that dispute, right?
So since you have been emphasizing on starting out on a will at a younger age or as you inherit, can a will be reworked? What's the frequency, and can one revoke a will as well?
So during my lifetime, I can have as many number of wills as I want. Generally, we advise to revisit your wills in circumstances where you have changed family dynamics. If there is a death in the family, if there is if you are expecting a baby, or if you're planning for a baby, if you inherit a lot of assets, substantial amount of assets, then you should definitely revisit your will, because the dynamics have changed. So revisiting a will maybe every 5 years would be recommended. So you can either do it through a codicil, which is an arm of the will, or you can have a separate will altogether in place. So once you make another will, the earlier one automatically gets revoked. So, irrespective of whether the new will is registered or unregistered, so this is a misconception about a lot of people, that if they have a registered will in place and they make a new will which stays unregistered for some reason, तो वो फिर भी the court would regard the registered one, which is not the case.
Okay.
So the last will and testament is the one that is given importance.
Even if it's not registered.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. You've really opened our eyes to how important it is to have these conversations so that there are less legal hassles and more of a legacy that people leave behind. So many key takeaways. This is a dinner table conversation that needs to be had immediately. It is very important to have a watertight structure and have your estate planning, your wills in place well in advance. It is for everyone. It is not just for the ultra rich. Even people like you and me do need to ensure that we have our wills in place. Portals like Udgam definitely help when it comes to unclaimed assets. And in order to ensure that you leave a legacy rather than hassles, you need to start your succession planning now. It is, of course, very critical to have a qualified estate planner to help you do so. Curious to know, after watching this episode, will you consider drafting your will and getting your succession planning in place? Do let us know in the comments section. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Do remember to subscribe to Personal Finance TV, and I'll catch you in the next episode.